Hello again, and welcome to another Big Data London webinar. Today's another one in our data transformation series, and we're joined by Gatwick Airport. So I'm Andy Steed, Content Director of Big Data London, and I'm joined today by Shariq Wagener from Gatwick Airport. Hi, Shariq.
Hi, Andy.
So these sessions are designed to be interactive. Ask as many questions as you like, and I will pose as many as I possibly can to Shariq after his presentation. You can do that with the question function at the bottom of the screen. Just a quick note of housekeeping. If you lose the stream at any point during this session, you shouldn't, but just in case you do, just click refresh on your browser and you should just jump straight back into the stream where you left off. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter for the day, Shariq. Shariq, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Guys, I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll go through the presentation. I'm going to talk a bit about myself, and then about Tableau. Nice. So a bit about me. So that was me about 18 years ago. Nah, not really. But I was definitely excited to be an analyst and looking forward to tell data stories. Little I knew that most of my time will be spent plumbing data out of systems and then cleaning data. Did that for years. Over time, that became a passion to make data available for self-service in the right hands. So people can start with analysis, not looking for data like I did. I worked in a number of industries over the years, ranging from retail, insurance, healthcare, public sector, transport, and even aviation. All of them shared the same problem: lack of access of clean, governed data to ask questions. I'm Shariq Wagener. I'm the Director of Data Analytics at Zsah, and we are a Tableau partner. Right. Before we start, I wanted to cover a few things. Typically, what's assumed by outsiders looking into large organizations at big brands that you come across, you feel data must be really clean, governed, organized, and accessible to gain knowledge when needed. Reality is a little bit different, and it definitely doesn't look as prestigious as this. Data is not organized, and more, if you are an analyst listening in, you probably know this. And data is very difficult to find as well. When you do try to find it, you find yourself drowning and needing help. That's a challenge. Not only people experience looking for data, but also faced by most change initiatives when they start out to create clean and governed data. Today's presentation is about Gatwick Airport and their journey to solve problems we just talked about. The presentation is broken up into 3 parts. We will cover the challenges in a bit more detail, the approach we took to address those challenges, and how we enable the users to adopt the change. By the end of the presentation, I want you to feel supported that solutions exist for common problems that you experience and how Tableau makes it easier. More importantly, I want you to attempt change. Please submit your questions like Andy said during the presentation, and we'll try to answer them at the end. If I can't due to any time limitations, I will share my contact details at the end of the presentation. Please make note and feel free to reach out. So let's get started. Where does the data come from? Well, data comes from systems that support business processes for a complex organization to function. That's my definition. Let's first look at how complex Gatwick actually is. I'm going to share some key facts that will start building a picture in your mind. Gatwick served 46 million passengers last year, with 280,000 aircraft arrivals and departures, to serve 230 destinations in 70 countries. That was operated by 50 airlines and give you an experience with about 25 retailers. As you can see from the right, there's a lot of people that work at Gatwick family. But how people travel to the airport plays an important part in every decision that is made. We will see this later when we talk about analyzing spatial data. But what do What do we really mean by complex? Data is created by people touch points. And in the airport industry, there's a lot of touch points. Let's have a look. People touch point starts earlier than physically present at the airport, you might not think. You may have noticed that I'm not calling them passengers and referring to them as people. Let's dive into a bit more into that. How many times one of you have dropped or picked up a loved one from the airport? And that's why for Gatwick, each of you is important, not just the passenger. The departure relationship starts with the pre-travel bookings of hotels, car park, land, and some other services that you might use website to book through or a partner. Followed by people arriving at the airport, passengers checking in, dropping bags, and now in some cases, some airlines even provide self-check-ins and bag drops as well. Security screening to make sure the right people are going to the right places with nothing interesting. Departure is phased slightly differently. It's phased from duty-free to dining, shopping, and then waiting to be boarded to your plane. That's just departures. You experience the whole process in reverse on arrivals. Now, think about the end-to-end journey here that you might have experienced yourself traveling to any destination out of the UK. Now, multiply that by 46 million times, 50 airlines, and 25 retailers. And when I earlier was talking about data generated by touch points, you can imagine there's a lot of data here. As you can see, Gatwick is not a typical business. And with that level of complexity and long assembly line comes a lot of specialist systems that house the airport running. But when you have that many systems, especially the specialist systems, you create a lot of silo data sets residing in them. And it makes it hard and in terms of making decisions and accessing that data. Now, let's talk about Gatwick. When we started our change initiatives, let's talk about the Gatwick landscape when we started. So, sticking to some key facts that matter for our conversation, Gatwick is an information-rich organization, mostly due to the hard work of embedded analysts around the business who have domain knowledge specifically embedded in the functions. There were hundreds of silo data sets around the organization that were ineffectively stitched in Excel. There was a central data solution that was beyond retirement, and tools were out of date. More worryingly, there were about 4,500 reports and dashboards that were in the standard catalogs. But when we reviewed them a little bit more closely, most of them were actually used to extract data into Excel. Now that I've given you a bit more context around the organization and the landscape that was on the ground, we're going to talk a bit more about the challenges in detail. Now, majority of data didn't exist in one place. People use Excel as the primary tool, but the lack of government reference data meant people were getting different results in the same questions. That's something all organizations experience that I've seen over the years as well. Let's look at some specific challenges to the organization, which might be also common for your organizations as well. It's a marathon, not a sprint, when you're talking about hundreds of data sets. You can't integrate them in one go. But if we port the data slowly, how do we allow users to continue exploiting data and still allow them to take advantage of what was released? More importantly, how do you reduce variability in answers in the same questions people ask while you take an iterative approach to your journey? A separate type of challenge, more along the spatial side. You may remember when we were talked about earlier how large part of Gatwick passengers travel using public transport or car. This data has to be analyzed. If you've ever tried analyzing spatial data in Excel, you will know how impossible that is. You need to overlap the location intelligence data with maps to make sense of it. Let's look at 3 challenges in relation to this. Gatwick were unable to create visually appealing maps that showed travel time data to and from Gatwick. They were unable to easily collate passenger server data, drill through from country to district level within a single map. A lot of effort and commercial costs were spent to prepare spatial data for visualization. That's some of the few challenges. Thinking about what direction we wanted to take to solve and address these challenges, we decided we needed an iterative approach and process to create the data sets to the end users. We needed a tool that would allow users to easily stitch out-of-the-box data sets and data on people's desktop, but still strike a balance between freedom and control, and also bring the spatial analysis capability to them. We needed to identify common data between business processes and curate them in advance, so there's conformity in the results regardless of the source and users across the business. Simply speaking, I'm talking about reference data that joins the organization. Every organization has key reference data. Solutions, right? We adopted an iterative approach to ingest, curate data sets, but prioritize the key business data that glues the organization together. We implemented Tableau to exploit, scale, and visualize part of our data ops lifecycle. We set up an embedded analyst organization that is supported by IT and its partners. Now, just going a bit more into detail about the types of organization that exist, there are pros and cons for each type of organization when you're deploying analytics around it. We don't have the time to discuss today, but the key takeaway here is that first try to make the organization run faster, how it's already set up to function, instead of trying to stop and recreate another image. Going a bit more into the data ops lifecycle. Again, we don't have enough time to cover today, but we created a data ops lifecycle to exploit data safely. Once the value of the data is proven, scale that data enterprise level, and then support the new change for business continuity, where Tableau played a key role. It's important for you to think about how you want to operate early. That is something you need to change from day one. So, how did Tableau help? Tableau provided the ability to stitch data easily using Tableau Desktop and even soon Data Prep. Tableau allowed the organization to release curated, clean, and governed datasets, where reference and business data that users could either consume directly or join with data sourced by themselves. By the ability to have a balance between freedom and control, high governance, to easily create sandpit, business manage, and standard catalog areas using Tableau sites. Talking about point number 4, I've not found one analyst who doesn't want their data to be presented in a visually appealing way. I don't think they exist. The intuitive design and out-of-the-box pixel-perfect visualization attracted the analyst to adopt the new tool easily and quickly. And it plays a big advantage when you're trying to implement a new technology into organizations. Adoption will play a key role in terms of the change to stick. And the last one, visualizing. Tableau allowed us to visualize data on maps, meant less reliance on external parties to provide intelligence for competitive analysis. Results. You'll see the results on the screen, the good results. So far we have ingested 50+ data sets. We have 40+ desktop users. We have 120 viewers around the organization. And centrally and created by the users, we almost have 100+ insights available in Tableau today. And it's growing. But these are just in terms of numbers. But what is the actual result? What's the actual thing that made a difference? In my opinion, it was the increase in self-service and the reduction in effort to ask the same and new questions. You all know many people, especially the analyst community, can create great visualization, but they only answers questions of today. When you have new questions, people always go back to data. At this point, it's important that change is implemented in a way that people use same tools, same processes in the same way to answer new questions. And that's what lasting and good change looks like. So far, number of different parts of the business have adopted Tableau, and for certain key business processes that flow through the entire organization for planning, forecasting, and reporting. That's quite significant if you think about just generally how our organizations are structured. You'll have some part of the organization which are support function, some part of the organization is operational, and the other part of the organization is with the value chain kind of runs through. Now, most organizations adopt each part of the business areas tend to have their own requirement, they have their own data sets, and they have their own challenges in terms of adoption as well. Sometimes from a skill perspective, sometimes from a perspective of time, and sometimes in terms of adopting new change requires a lot of effort from the organization to support them. Luckily, Gatwick provided that to the organization throughout the phase whilst we were deploying Tableau. And as you can see, a number of different areas actually adopted it, especially also the core business processes that kind of cut through the entire organization. But what do I mean by adoption? Let's talk a bit more in detail about the last part of the presentation in a bit more depth. So, inspired from Tableau Blueprint, we created a Tableau adoption program that I'm going to explain in detail and show its results. Instead of taking the typical 2-day training approach, we opted to fit around business users for an 8-week nurturing program. It may sound like a lot of work, as you can imagine. 8 weeks sounds like a tremendous task where you'd be imagining we did a lot of different training sessions around the organization and wasted a lot of people's time. But instead, actually, we ran short and sharp regular sessions and trained the brain. Let me ask you a question, right? Who in a business environment actually has a time to sit through a 2-day training course and also has the mental capacity to remember everything that was taught? We all been there. I think most of you know the answer to that question. Let me explain why that is. Yes, exactly. 70% is lost after 1 day of training. People often forget because it was never actually learned in the first place. I once read this somewhere and summarized the issue pretty well. Considering how much we remember after a few days worth of training, traditional training methods in business environments are a little bit flawed and outdated. It's not just a lost investment, considering almost billions of dollars a year are spent globally on training, but also the lost opportunity to teach a new skill and make the change stick. Not sure how you're solving this issue, but let's see how we solved it. We took a 4-step approach. We first went and understood people's roles, what's required to fulfill their jobs. And it's very key, right? That people go out in the organization and understand what type of roles people are performing. Analysts differ from role to role. It's important that the low-level information is understood. And there's the other type of users that kind of keep getting forgotten. There's always a bigger community of these non-analyst users who infrequently, or sometimes frequently, do analysis. And together, they have the capacity to create a data culture in an organization. We went down, we understood what is actually required from Tableau for people to enable their roles. Secondly, we gave people regular challenges throughout these sessions that were kind of spread across this 8-week period to apply what was learned. What we did then, during these challenges or in between them, we had regular cycles where these challenges were presented in groups and we provided feedback. But the people also kind of learned from each other as well, whilst they were, demoing how they attempted to, those challenges. And that created a bit of a culture for learning from each other. And then throughout this program, they had access to a video library portal that allowed them to revisit topics when they forgot. Let's look at how we structured the program over an 8-week period. Some of you might be familiar with the Tableau Learning parts. This is absolutely a great resource. If you're not familiar, please look into it. What we did, we augmented these parts with our nurturing program that had different phases equipped to handle all types of roles around the organization. And as you can see from the individual steps, we had multiple sessions repeated by challenges and feedback cycles that encourage people to attempt new things. It encouraged people to learn from each other and created an open forum to people discuss challenges they not only were facing, attempting those challenges, but also the challenge they face in their roles as well, and the data they used. Throughout the cycle, different type of users dropped out before going to the next stage because that might be sufficient for them to perform their roles. Like we said earlier, there's two types of users out there of Tableau or data. One that has primarily the entire job focusing on analysis, but these are these non-analysts out there, and probably a large numbers, who have an element of analysis part of their job kind of baked in, or they do infrequently analysis based on the questions they either get themselves, either they have themselves or get from their management. And they don't need, they don't need to create the best visualization that need to be kind of displayed, or need to have a competition around, but they need to be sufficient for them to answer the questions. Let's look at some stats now, how to prove how this approach performed at Gatwick. We initially kick off these programs by a webinar to show the art of the possible. Like all normal people, like most of you, it's important for people to understand what they're working towards. It kind of gets forgotten when normally you start a training sessions, or you start doing training. You dive in straight away. These sessions is not only for people who do analysis, but also for the decision makers and managers, so they can understand what to expect from the people who are attending the adoption program. In Gatwick case, almost 70 people attended the initial webinar, which is absolutely amazing. They were, the combination of people, of analysts, managers, decision makers, people, like I mentioned earlier, people who have part of their job kind of depends on analysis, not their entirety. And it was a great turnout. And during this session, they could really see if they kind of go through the nurturing program, what are the things they could be able to do themselves or for their organization. And that kind of sparked an interest. That was followed by the beginner sessions. By the way, most of these sessions, apart from the webinar, most of the sessions we normally do it in small groups. So we had about 6 to 7 people in groups, was done remotely in all cases. And they were attended by 42 people who attempted the challenges, and we provided feedback to. The advanced sessions were further attended by 29 people who again attempted new challenges, and again we provided feedback to. And the reason I keep bringing back the cycle of feedback is very important, because similar to how we have how we train or learn anything, normally if you have a opportunity to bounce ideas of what you learn, share it with others, and then they kind of basically see how other people are doing, it creates a good environment for people to then not only absorb what they've learned a lot more better, but also feel that they are supported through a community. Now, it's not only a community about it, we also provide them resources online as well, like Tableau provides as well, which kind of basically enhance the whole experience. Not only they were learning from us, they were learning from each other, but they also were learning from this vast Tableau community that exists today online. And to people's surprise, more than 20 plus people gained Tableau badges, and some of them are now preparing for further badges and even certification in some cases, or have already gained some. We could hear how most of the management was saying, keep seeing when people on LinkedIn, that attend the adoption program are gaining, are gaining badges, or they basically posting on their LinkedIn, how proud they were. And throughout this program, they had a place to go if they needed help, which had resources and how-to videos to help them during the adoption and even afterwards. This is similar to how you normally used to go on training, and somebody give used to a thick book of training manuals that normally gather dust. Instead, the approach we took was, let's create a place where people can go and watch these videos, and that becomes a place not only for helping them through the adoption nurturing program, but also a place to keep connected and give them more help over a longer period of time. So I told you about Gatwick Airport, challenge they face, like many other organizations, approach we took to implement solutions, and how we help users adopt Tableau a little differently to the traditional ways that most of you are used to. Really hope this was useful, and you'll feel confident and change is achievable for issues that are common across industries. If you don't use Tableau, I really encourage you to download a 14-day trial and see for yourself how easy it is to use. I've seen countless examples where people downloaded Tableau out of interest and then suddenly became, fell in love with it, similar to like us. If you already used Tableau, I would encourage you to do something else. I would like you to think how to make your organization adopt Tableau even better. Visit the Tableau Learning part. See on our website for more information on Tableau adoption as well. Like I said, we'll try to, we got loads of time left. We'll try to answer some questions. If for time limitation, we can't, then you got my details on the right. Feel free to reach out. Andy?
Perfect. Thanks, Shariq. So before we move on to the Q&As, I was just going to say a little bit about some of the features of the webinar. Firstly, thank you very much, Shariq. Great presentation. Enjoyed that. If anybody wants to see any part of it again, it's available on demand almost instantly after this finishes. So you can go back in, you can rewind, fast forward, watch a couple of minutes, or go to a certain slide that was of particular interest to you. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity to mention Big Data London Virtual, which is coming up on the 23rd and 24th of September. If you haven't registered already, do. It's going to be great. We've got over 100 sessions for you to pick your own conference agenda for. Go on the website, have a look at what's going on, and register. Be wonderful to see you there. So anyway, back to you, Shariq. I'm going to pick the first question, and I'm going to make it technology specific. So we talked about Tableau, but obviously there must have been a point where you were looking at other potential solutions. This question mentions other ones, but there's no need to mention other competitors by name. But what stuck out with Tableau? What made you kind of choose that as the tool of choice?
That's a really good question. You probably know this as well. Most organizations, when they start thinking about change, you have a choice to make. The industry provides a lot of different tools. Some are great, some are good. And making a choice will always come down to certain things, right? There's a lot of tools, already out there. Some are, and even in Gatwick, when we started looking inwards, predominantly a variety of different tools, without mentioning them, were being already used, right? And it was an endless list. I was actually surprised how many tools being used in an organization of the size of Gatwick. And some of them were extracting data. The other one had the ability to manipulate data. And then the certain tools were really good in presentation. However, Tableau, kind of sets itself apart and beyond others because of the ease of use and the effectiveness to try to get output that you envision, right? This was pretty much critical factor in people's working day, and it often kind of sometimes the barrier to learning something new. With some focused training sessions, users were able to then start creating basic and much needed in visualization as well. And like I mentioned in the presentation as well, when you're starting some change initiatives, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And most organizations now have a lot of silo data sets. They have a lot of systems as well. You cannot integrate all the data sets in one go. It's just not possible physically. People who try, they normally have a lot of failed projects on their hand as well. So you need the ability to bring data, slowly into the market, into your organization, but still provide the ability for the end user to be able to make use of the data that's coming through from the change initiative, plus all the data that kind of exists on their desktop or they source themselves for years, right? Remember, any organization exists before any change initiatives takes place as well. Having the ability then to stitch these data sets together plays a key part into it. And Tableau provides a great ability to kind of stitch data, join data sets together, even before Tableau Prep came out. Now with Tableau Prep, that even amplified that ability as well. And that kind of basically made Tableau kind of stand out. Apart from the other thing that probably kind of, which I mentioned earlier as well, is that analysts always want to make their data story look good, and that's part of it. Like I said, I've just not met, and there might be some out there, right? And they have a specific reason for not visualizing their data. But in most cases, right, data makes sense when it's visualized, and then therefore most of the analysts want their visualization to be appealing and need to be created easily as well. You can create sometimes great visualizations using many tools, but it takes a very long time. It's very painful. Like I mentioned, I was before I was an analyst myself, before having fancy titles and delivering change. I've experienced this myself, where you're trying to implement, trying to make sense of the data, making it look good to twice as long. Forget all the plumbing I have to do to get the data out, clean it, and then basically glue that data together. The visualization, making it look good out of the box is very hard. Tableau reduces that barrier, right? It makes it pixel perfect out of the box that people can take advantage of. And so the other part that we stood out for years, and also at Gatwick as well, is it's a visual analytics tool. It's not just a data exploration tool. It's not to create reports and dashboards. You push data into it, and it automatically gives you options to visualize that data, learn from that data, and ask new questions, which kind of it's repetitive in its way, and that's what leads to gaining insight. Not the question you started with sometimes, but the question you ask once you get an answer from it, and then having the ability to then keep going down that path, and is key. But the tool needs to kind of be aligned and work with it, and that's what Tableau provided, and that's why the organization used Tableau.
Okay, well, yeah, we're going right down the other end with tools now. Someone talking about dependency with Excel. Is this something that will wean his people away from Excel, or?
There's a question we've all been hearing, and the question that keeps coming up. Tableau is not there to replace Excel. They both have their own place in the organization, and key is to ensuring the right balance is struck. Right? A common mistake is to try and replicate Excel spreadsheet in large Tableau tables into a single workbook, and that's exactly what somebody brings in a massive Excel file and say, just replace that and put that in Tableau. Yes, it will be exactly how it was before. You don't really gain anything from it. The approach we took at Gatwick was slightly different. We looked at the same data, but providing alternative ways to explain data using graphics. And that's what Tableau provides. And quite often, in some cases, there's a place and time for tabular reports, right? Which what Excel provides as well. And in some cases, replicating that, although some people will be completely against it, there is a place and time for it. I've worked in organizations that have a very operational dependency, graphical interface, and I just want the exact number to just go and do something about it now. And in that case, the tabular data, representing data in tabular format exists, but mostly data should be visualized in a way so it makes more sense. And in that kind of situation, what we found, right, is when we took that data into Tableau and started visualizing, people were often surprised at what different way you could view data, and that encouraged them to kind of basically ask more questions or develop those insights further themselves as well, or try something themselves as well, using the data previously they used to manually handle in Excel.
Perfect. So there's another question. I was going to ask something around this myself as well, actually, about the training. What made you do it that way? It didn't look totally conventional. Was it something that you came to over time? Is it something that you have done over experience, and it's better that way, perhaps?
I think the best way to kind of sum it up is experience the pain myself. Sitting in the training sessions, and then subsequently, also setting up these training sessions, when we're delivering projects in general as well, like Gatwick. And what you found is that users' commitment to 2 days training was always shaky, right? And a lot of basically people will pull out last minute due to priority work, or something that just came in out of nowhere. And it became a common theme, not only at Gatwick, but over the years. You could see that people find it really difficult to commit to 2 days. Apart from the fact that we just discussed how much people remember after 2 days worth of training as well. Which between those two things, we said to ourselves, we actually have to do something about this. And we started basically doing some research in terms of what is effective training, right? And how can we make it a bit more effective, a bit more sharper? And we could see the research coming, research that we read and understood, that longer period of training of the same subject is not, the stickiness of that just doesn't exist. And that's why you never actually learned it, and then therefore you will never apply it, and then the reality is people will always go back to how things were. And that's not really good, right? From an investment perspective, also the hard work that kind of people put into in plumbing that data, cleaning it, governing it, caring about it, and then presenting it. But in the end, people just always kind of go back to it, because that last part, which is the community of the analysts and the non-analytic, analyst community, doesn't have the skills needed to be able to take full advantage of it. So that kind of became apparent. So what we did instead is we then started pinching it down to about 2-3 hours worth of sessions for users, but over a very prolonged period of time. Because the other thing we could see, and we know that ourselves, practice makes you perfect, right? It's been touted as over the years, but you need to give time for people to practice. But at the same time, we also needed a approach. It's great, people practice, but then you got to speak to somebody once you've practiced something to say, have I done it right? Or you might stuck. You need a place to come back and speak to somebody to say, right, how do I do this? Or if I'm stuck, it's great giving somebody a training manual. It's great to give somebody an email. It's never the same to have a one-to-one relationship where people can come back in a group and say, well, I did this, but I actually find this is better. And that's what I call learning from each other as well. So that's the second part of it, right? That kind of that became a bit more cyclic. And then the more people attended, the more people started giving feedback, the more things they tried out more. And then, we actually had people chasing us to find out when the next sessions are, which is different to where people just kept dropping off training, right? That we actually planned them for 2 days. And, and the feedback was astonishing as well, right? People actually found it a lot more, much more better. It worked around their business as well, how they work. People dedicating 2-3 hours, plan, out of the day. It's like running a workshop or some long meetings that we all have been to, and probably don't want to be 2-3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But it exists. So that kind of played into it as well. But that's one of the main reasons that we went for a different approach, and it worked.
Perfect. And I've got another good question come in. Thanks very much. I'm going to change the ending of it slightly, but it's about obviously with change comes resistance to change. Was there much resistance within Gatwick to this sort of cultural change? And my subtext adding on to it, how did you get around it? How did you get over it? How did you convince people that change in this instance is good?
I think with change normally comes resistance, not because people naturally hate change. It's because it means they have to change while still doing their full-time job. Right? That kind of is a key thing. The other thing is, a lot of people feel that organizations resist change. In reality, is some of it plays into it by not listening to the organization, what the actual users are saying, or trying to create a organization like I was talking earlier as well. Sometimes coming in guns blazing, we'll integrate hundreds of data sets in 1 month, and then we will change the full operating model as well in another month, and then month 3 suddenly you'll have a new way of working. 18 months later you'll find you did none of that because you were completely going against the time. And that kind of plays key in actually going through the organization with the people and trying to implement change. Is not to change the image of the organization of day one. Is to make that organization run faster in the way it was already set up. In Gatwick case, like we were mentioning earlier, they had a way of having embedded analysts throughout the organization. Initially, when somebody comes in and looks at it, and say, that's not effective. Actually, should have all the analysts sitting in a central place, so best practice is shared. We have all the same ways of working, etc., etc. But it's different from organization to organization. In the Gatwick case, like we mentioned, if you were looking at all the business processes or activities that is performed right for a single passenger, each of them is run by a different part of the organization. They have a lot of specialist systems that perform specialist processes, and that means somebody needs to actually understand that data. Right? You can buy the best tools, you can buy other people to do your consultancy wise as well. But the domain knowledge of the data always resides with the business, with the people who understand the business well. The way the organization, especially in Gatwick, in terms of the complexity as well, analysts having domain knowledge played a key role, and that's why we left the embedded online and analytical organization running the way it is, and that kind of reduces the resistance as well. So that answered the question well.
Yeah, no, it did. Fantastic. It almost answered my follow-up question, which was about what sort of people do you need and how would you structure that? So, obviously, in this instance, it sounds like the data team was reasonably disparate. But what sort of people do you need? What sort of skills do they need to make a success of a project like this?
I think there's always two parts, when you're implementing change, is that there's a two-sided coin, like I always say. Right? One is the technical change and one is the business change. So in the technical change, yes, of course, when you're integrating data, you need a program or project team or data engineering team that basically comes that data out from all these systems, clean and govern, clean the data, puts the processes in place, technical processes that provide governance. But that's pretty much what technical engineering teams will be able to do. They bought the data and then it's available for self-service. That's where the next hurdle starts, where the business change starts coming in. Now, the business change in Gatwick case, like we were saying, based on the types of organization where you have a central and also a embedded organization, which is a lot more larger than the central one. You need people. I don't think you need specific type of people, right, from a business change perspective. Like I mentioned, right, I always see the organization based on two people. A lot of these projects or change initiatives kind of just focus on the analyst community. It's the same problem then. If you want answers to questions, you'll always have to go back to the analyst. The change better is where you also kind of bring on board the people who part of their job, ask questions from data or partially do analysis before delivering some business process as well. And together that kind of creates a little bit of data culture as well. And most of them will have will know how to use Excel. So from a roles in specific, when you're assessing in terms of who'll be able to ask questions for data, pretty much everybody that uses Excel, right? And having the way Tableau is built and the Tableau, the way it is intuitive and easy to use, makes it really easy for anybody to really ask the questions.
Yes. Yeah. So it sort of democratizes it, but it's a sort of a self-serve, self-curating element that you were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah, people now ask questions from data. They don't. Not a lot of them want. There's still a place, and time for having a standard report and dashboard catalog. And I think I normally recommend as well. Some people don't like it, but reality is, for the same question that are asked weekly, periodically, monthly, yearly, for example, you don't want to ask the question like it's it's a new endeavor, right? You want a standard catalog where you can go and people can just ask questions that they normally ask on a regular basis, like what's the answer to this KPI, what happened yesterday, all that descriptive analytics. Right? And looking backwards at a rear view mirror, which plays a role in performance management. Right? So for that, a standard catalog should exist.
Yep.
But for everything else, people now want access to data, so they can ask the question themselves rather than heavily reliant on technical resources, which are always hard to find.
Yeah. So last question, kind of a general one. I ask this quite often. Is there any advice you'd give to people who are watching this? Presumably there's a few people watching this who are, starting up on this kind of journey, becoming data-driven, putting the data in the hands of the users, that kind of thing. Is there one bit of advice or something like that sticks that you could give people, who are right at the start of this, who are thinking, oh, where should I start?
I think spend some time, if you're coming in from outside and starting these initiatives, spend some time understanding the organization. There's a lot of exchange initiatives fails because they somebody from outside will come with an agenda and then start to deliver, and again we'll be going against the tide, and it just doesn't work. So spend some time out there understanding the organization. If you are already part of the organization and want to change, then start looking at the roles people perform and work backwards from them, because that's where you'll be providing something useful to the person that's currently doing a job already, and that will play a key role for them to then pick up that change and start running with it. At the end of the day, change initiatives or people who want to implement any change tend to be smaller versus a larger community that needs to actually run with it for a longer period of time. And the stickiness of change comes of creating a culture. It's a fancy word. Everybody talks about data culture these days. But what is it really? It's different things to different people, and on different conversations, I might use a different way of describing it as well. But specifically because we are talking about self-service, we're using about Tableau, people adopt technology as well. Key thing is for organizations people to understand that create an environment where people are learning, present while you are present or you're not present, and that will create a culture, right? Create an environment where people have a way of talking to each other and working with each other as well. And we were talking about, for example, and a place to experiment. We were talking about, for example, the Tableau sites, for example, where you can create sandpit environment, you can create business managed content, and then the standard catalog, which might be managed by a center of excellence. Whether it's under a chief data officer, or whether it's within under a CIO, doesn't really matter. But you have segregated area for people to exploit, try things out safely, and then share between each other as well. Collaboration is key, and that's what Tableau kind of also provides quite easily. You connect, you create, you collaborate. Think about those 3 C's. When you're starting your internal journey.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much. I think that's us out of time for now. However, it was really lovely talking to you. Great to hear about Gatwick and everything that you've been up to there. Like I said, do catch it again on demand if there's anything you want to go through. And from me and from Shariq, it's goodbye for now. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll catch you at the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.